Half of all Roman soldiers who died on campaign were claimed not by swords, but by waterborne disease. Their enemy was invisible, lurking in every sip. Yet without understanding germs, Roman legionaries improvised a drink that killed up to 99% of deadly microbes, centuries ahead of science. How did they stumble onto this life-saving secret? And what else did survival on the march demand? Roman commanders understood that the greatest threat to their legions often came not from enemy weapons, but from the water their men drank each day. On campaign, disease swept through the ranks with a speed that no sword could match. Dysentery, typhoid, and cholera, names unknown to the Romans, but with symptoms all too familiar, left men feverish, racked with pain, and too weak to fight. Ancient records and modern estimates agree. More than half of all military deaths on these long marches were caused by illness, not battle. In the African deserts, Caesar's troops dug desperately for water, only to find muddy pools that brought waves of sickness. At siege camps from Judea to Gaul, entire cohorts fell ill within days, their numbers dwindling before a single arrow was loosed. The Romans blamed foul air or cursed ground, warning against camps near swamps or stagnant streams. Legionary manuals described unwholesome water with the same caution as a hostile ambush. Soldiers learned to eye every source with suspicion. A clear spring meant hope, and a murky puddle spelled danger. The invisible enemy, disease, could pass from one man to the next with a single careless sip. Discipline alone was not enough to guarantee safety. Even the most hardened veterans feared the outbreak that could begin with a single contaminated jug. In the end, survival depended on vigilance, routine, and a willingness to endure thirst rather than risk the wrong mouthful. Every legionary carried the memory of men lost to unseen dangers, and every march became a test of whether knowledge and discipline could hold death at bay. A legionary's daily drink was no luxury. In battered clay cups or leather flasks, they mixed water with sharp, sour vinegar, creating a cloudy brew called posca. To Roman tastes, posca was nothing special, often described as biting or even unpleasant. Yet for soldiers far from home, it became as routine as bread and salt. Vinegar rations issued by the quartermaster were poured into water from whatever source the march provided. The result was a thin, acidic drink with a tang that masked the taste of stagnant or muddy water. Few realized that this simple mixture held the key to survival. Roman vinegar, made from spoiled wine, typically contained about 3% acetic acid. Modern laboratory tests show that at this strength, vinegar can kill up to 99% of the bacteria that cause waterborne illness, E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, and more. Even a quick stir and a short wait in a battered ampulla could make dangerous water far safer to drink. Legionaries did not know about microbes, but they knew that men who drank posca fell ill less often. Some added herbs or a touch of honey, but most endured the sourness, knowing it was better than the risk. The paradox of posca is clear. What began as a way to stretch rations and mask foul flavors became an accidental antiseptic. Each mouthful was a small act of practical genius. Unpleasant perhaps, but quietly effective. For the marching legion, posca was the first line of defense against the invisible enemy lurking in every stream and puddle. A legionary's thirst was never a private matter. Every drop of water that reached a soldier's lips had already passed through a strict chain of command. The Aquarius, a specialist chosen for reliability, led small teams ahead of the marching column, searching for springs or clear streams. When a source was found, it was not simply a matter of dipping a flask. Water was tasted, inspected for clarity and flow, and guarded against contamination. Only then did the order come down to fill the ampullae. Each legionary carried one, usually holding between 1 and 2 liters, often stamped with a unit mark or the owner's name scratched into the clay. The water itself was hauled in bulk, sloshing inside wooden barrels or ceramic dolia strapped to heavy carts. A single cart could carry as much as 500 liters, enough to supply a century for a day's march. These carts rolled at the center of the column, watched constantly to prevent theft or sabotage. Rules were absolute. No man drank from a stream or filled his flask without the centurion's word. Breaking discipline meant punishment, loss of pay, extra duties, or the lash. Inscriptions from legionary tombstones and scribbled pay records at Vindolanda honor Aquarii, who kept their units healthy and moving. The Aquarius was more than a water boy. He was a guardian, and sometimes the difference between a fighting force and a camp of the sick. The next step began only after water was safely in hand, making it truly fit to drink. Cloth and patience stood between a legionary and a mouthful of mud. After water was hauled in from a stream or shallow well, the first step was always filtration. Soldiers would drape a strip of linen or a scrap of wool across the mouth of a jug or amphora, pouring water slowly so that grit, insects, and floating debris caught in the fibers. This simple act did not make water pure, but it cleared away the visible dangers, the wriggling larvae, the grass blades, the swirling silt. Archaeological finds from frontier camps show textile impressions on the insides of amphorae, and some vessels still hold thin layers of settled mud, evidence that this was no occasional habit but a routine part of military life. Some units used perforated ceramic discs as sieves, dropping them into the necks of jars for an extra barrier. Once filtered, the water was set aside in large storage jars or open bowls. Legionaries knew that time could be as powerful as any tool. Left overnight, heavy particles sank to the bottom, forming a thick sludge. At dawn, the cleanest water could be ladled from the top, leaving the dregs untouched. In a world without microscopes or chemical tests, these low-tech routines brought clarity and confidence. The result was water that looked and tasted cleaner, a small victory over the hazards of the march, and a crucial step before any drop touched a soldier's lips. A Roman camp operated as a living barrier between water and waste. At the heart of this system stood the Praefectus Castrorum, the officer charged with every detail of camp engineering. His first priority was to keep drinking water safe from contamination. Latrines and refuse pits were always sited downstream or downwind, never allowed to threaten the sources that fed the camp's wells and barrels. Ancient manuals by Vitruvius and Frontinus set out these rules in careful detail, and archaeology confirms their reach. In permanent camps, clay or lead pipes carried fresh water from distant springs or aqueducts, bypassing any risk of polluted runoff. Wastewater followed its own path, channeled away through stone-lined drains and out beyond the ramparts. This strict separation was enforced every evening as engineers marked out the grid of ditches and pits before a single tent was pitched. The result was a camp that functioned not just as a fortress, but as a machine for health, protecting every legionary from the dangers that lurked in their own footsteps. Boiling water was rarely an option on the open road, but every Roman camp carried the means to do it when circumstances allowed. Blackened camp kettles, unearthed at sites from Britain to Syria, speak to a practice that was more than just culinary. Whenever water was heated for cooking pulse or broth, it was brought to a rolling boil, unintentionally destroying bacteria that could have felled an entire century. This routine, born of hunger and necessity, offered a periodic safety net even when fuel was scarce and time was short. Later armies, lacking such discipline or infrastructure, paid the price. During the Crimean War, British and French soldiers died in droves from cholera and dysentery, their camps awash in contaminated water and poorly managed waste. Epidemiologists now point to Roman methods, layered, consistent, and enforced, as a model for disease prevention centuries ahead of their time. The Legion's collective effort, validated by modern science, stands as a benchmark that many would forget, to their peril. Safe water remains a frontline defense in every crisis. Now, as in Rome, nearly 2 billion people today still lack reliable, clean water, and disease claims millions. The lesson endures. Survival hinges not just on strength, but on what we drink and on our willingness to protect it.